Hello and welcome inside for part 2 of this video lecture. As mentioned, we will be looking at ecological frameworks found in Learning for Sustainable Development and Sustainability. Specifically, we will be discussing deep ecology, social ecology, and ecofeminism. So as scholars began to expand the field of learning for sustainable development, broadly understood to be all-encompassing, deep ecology was argued to be an ideal philosophical underpinning for taking learning outdoors. Deep ecology originates from Norwegian philosopher and environmentalist Arne Næss. Soon after Arne Næss introduced his theories as an ecological ontology, a way of being, deep ecology soon grew as an epistemology, a body of knowledge to study, a social movement, an environmental ethic, and a reaction to the world's global environmental problems. In sum, it is a paradigm shift, placing more emphasis on the ecological perspective while challenging dominant modes of thinking and being in capitalist societies. Important to deep ecology is how humans conceive of their existence and relationship with the natural environment. Deep ecology suggests that we move from anthropocentrism to biocentrism. In order to achieve such a change, a fundamental shift in values has to occur, moving from the present relationship where humanity is seen to be the dominator of nature, to a position where human beings are located within nature as a biological dependent. As such, humans are not separate from nature. They are one piece of a complex and interrelated network that presupposes the intrinsic value of all life forms. As deep ecology appreciates all living organisms as equals, humans are just one strand in the web of life. Like all theories, deep ecology is not without critiques. One of the original critiques was offered by Marxist social ecologist Murray Bookchin, who along with ecofeminist Chaya Heller termed deep ecology as ecolala. Bookchin and others contend that deep ecology fails to account for a hierarchical society, that it lacks substance, and that it fuses together a vast array of poorly theorized ideas. Bookchin proposes that ecologists and environmentalists move from a deep ecology to a social ecology, where in extending and agreeing with some of the notions of deep ecology, there is a recognition that global environmental issues, barring natural disasters, are linked to social conditions and social ills. Bookchin and other social ecologists argue that deep ecology does not acknowledge the intersectionality of race, class, and gender, and as such, current environmental issues cannot be resolved without a fulsome understanding of social inequities and the social organization of societies. Robbie Nicol would respond to these critiques as overzealous while showcasing a selective interpretation and general misunderstanding of deep ecology principles. He would further state that deep ecology promotes an interconnectedness between humans and the more than human world, and that the theory offers a reconceptualization of human understanding of our place in nature. Through my reading of deep ecology, I understand how commentators have concluded that deep ecology fails to account for social class, race, ethnicity, and gender when discussing environmental issues, as there is no explicit mention of intersectionality in the writing. Other detractors, like former US presidential candidate Al Gore, assert that deep ecology is eco-fascist and limits humans to a vermin-like, all-consuming role, and as such does not place enough agency on humans to consider and make the necessary behavioral shifts to enact environmental change. To extend Gore's contention, based on my engagement with deep ecology, I can acknowledge that deep ecology proposes an ontological shift that is often misunderstood. For example, a cursory engagement with deep ecology might lead some people to count their environmental behaviors. In other words, one might start to compost, use less water, and rely on self-propelled transport. These behavioral adjustments, while useful, is not how I think about deep ecology. Quite simply, deep ecology suggests that we need to develop a different relationship with our planet. Nicol points out that deep ecology is not about teaching people what to think, but rather what to think about. In my analysis, I would argue that thinking and interpreting the what and the how provides a strong framework. However, to adequately address environmental issues, philosophy needs to be tightly coupled with pragmatism. In other words, we need change in action from all groups in the population, not only those who appear to be included in what deep ecology proposes. The principles of deep ecology, which if you haven't read yet, I encourage you all to do, while admirable in essence, are not novel, and as Bell Hooks points out, to indigenous people, the basic tenets of deep ecology are just a reinvention of very ancient principles that they have been living for a millennia before their ways were disrupted and in many ways destroyed by colonial forces. She further says, quote, "To learn who I am today on this land I live on, I've had to recover that heritage and realize a multicultural self. By studying the process others have gone through to embrace the cultural difference of each background to understand the importance of decolonizing my mind." So as noted in the above passage by Bell Hooks, there is something inherently colonial to the theorizing found in deep ecology. I agree with Nichol insofar as deep ecology doubters tend to overfocus on a few principles that appear somewhat contradictory to that of the philosophy. However, deep ecology, like many theories, is somewhat abstract. My main quibble with deep ecology is its call for population decrease and population control, and this is Principle 5. One example of how this Malthusian thinking has been taken too far, and Thomas Malthus was a 17th century English vicar who proposed killing off the have-nots of society to rid England of its social ills. So, in short, Malthusian theory calls for population control. And so one example of how this Malthusian thinking has been taken too far in deep ecology is when Foreman and Sessions, in an interview for an Australian periodical, stated, quote, "The worst thing that we can do in Ethiopia is to give aid. The best thing would be to just let nature seek its own balance, to let the people there just starve," end quote. And while it's important to note that many deep ecologists have distanced themselves from this statement, it perhaps highlights how the ideologies of deep ecology do not account for the socio, political, economical, and historical context and consequences of environmental issues. Unlike Robbie Nichol, not all deep ecologists see the world as integrally interconnected. While I support and value many aspects of deep ecology, such as its foundation in Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, I do have issues with its hints at Malthusian theory and that it prescribes principles to adhere to. Jickling critiques how the principles of deep ecology have been applied to education. He argues that deep ecology is inherently uneducational, as education should allow and promote people thinking for themselves. While deep ecology certainly has an interesting philosophical and spiritual thinking that could be used pedagogically, there has been a misinterpretation of Arne Naess's original conception. Deep ecology has proposed a philosophical basis for a more holistic ecological ethos, and social ecology applies a critical Marxist perspective to target the social organization of the dominator effect. Ecofeminism explores the effect of patriarchy on nature. Ecofeminism emerged from a social ecology and can further complicate deep ecology and social ecology as theoretical standpoints. It has been used increasingly in learning for sustainable development research over the past decade. Surprisingly, ecofeminism is now entering the mainstream Canadian political forum, with NDP leadership candidate Nikki Ashton using the term to self-describe and potentially differentiate her position from Justin Trudeau's during a recent debate for NDP leadership, and this was on March 7th, 2017. Ecofeminists view patriarchy and the subordination of women as the archetype of all domination and exploitation in the various hierarchical, militaristic, capitalist, and industrial forms. Early ecofeminism focused on drawing the link between how historically the mistreatment and domination of nature is comparable with the mistreatment and domination of women. Ecofeminists argue that there is a natural affiliation between feminism and ecology due to their shared history. Prioritizing the experiential knowledge of women for addressing environmental concerns, ecofeminists insist on moving beyond human consciousness and embrace the non-human world. Much like deep ecology, ecofeminism has recently fallen out of favor in some academic circles because some supporters have taken an essentialist position to sex and gender. Nonetheless, it is still regularly used in learning for sustainable development research. With a growing number of voices advocating for more theory in learning for sustainable development, a general understanding of deep ecology, social ecology, and ecofeminism is crucial. While some recent literature is focused on discussions around ecofeminism, eco-justice, and social justice, it is my observation that some of the educational approaches taking place are still subscribing to the historical narratives that have been employed in previous generations of Outward Bound, Project DARE, Venture Trust, and Rayleigh International, and several other outdoor field centers. As such, these centers and programs do not account for place or for an understanding of the environmental processes and social structures. In 2002, deep ecologist Robbie Nicol called for more epistemological diversity in learning for sustainable development and took issue with programs that expected an understanding of nature to occur from focusing on discrete educational competencies while outdoors or simply while paddling a canoe. In a comparable educational research context using philosophical and an ecofeminist lens, Blenkinsop, Derby, and Pearsall highlight the wide range of potential connections that youth can make with the natural world. However, conventional conceptions of masculinity often prevent cisgender boys from developing an authentic connection with nature and the non-human world that does not include conquest over nature. The authors argue that in our neoliberal patriarchal society, we become isolated and masculinity is defined as indifference to other than human beings and is further enforced via peers. Taken together, it can be argued that the historical and theoretical background of learning for sustainable development has shaped its perception, research direction, and current programming.